Doug Weiss and Joni Lamb thought their secrets were safe, until Lisa Weiss broke her silence. In a shocking twist that no one saw coming, Lisa drops explosive details that could end everything for Doug and Joni forever. Affairs, betrayals, hidden moves behind the scenes. Lisa's revelations are turning the Christian media world upside down. This isn't just drama, it's the final chapter that could destroy their carefully crafted empire. Stay tuned, because once you hear what Lisa says, you can't unhear it. For many years, everyone saw Doug Weiss as the perfect Christian husband and marriage counselor. He was on TV, speaking at churches, writing books, and telling couples how to save their marriages and love each other well. People clapped for him, trusted him, and followed his advice. To the world, Doug was a man of faith and loyalty, someone who knew what it meant to honor your vows and protect your marriage. But while he stood on stages teaching others how to love their spouses, his own wife Lisa Weiss was sitting at home, feeling invisible and alone. Lisa had supported Doug for over 30 years, raising their children, managing the house, and helping him build his ministry. She believed in his mission and in the man she thought he was. While Doug was on the road, Lisa held the family together, waiting for him to come home, hoping for small moments of connection. But when he came home, he was often tired, distracted, and focused on the next sermon, the next trip, or the next book. The conversations Lisa longed for rarely happened, and the warm glances she missed never returned. She would sit across from him at the dinner table, trying to talk, but his mind was somewhere else, and she felt like a ghost in her own home. The hardest part for Lisa wasn't just the loneliness, although that hurt deeply. It was watching the man she loved tell the world to cherish their wives while he barely looked her in the eyes. It was hearing him preach about faithfulness and connection while she felt unseen, like an afterthought in the life they had built together. Lisa tried to convince herself it was just a busy season, that things would get better once Doug finished his next big project. But the busy seasons never ended, and the distance between them only grew. People would tell Lisa how blessed she was to have such a godly husband, praising Doug for his wisdom and kindness. She would smile politely, holding back tears, knowing they only saw the carefully curated image Doug showed the world. They didn't see the nights she cried alone, praying for God to fix what was breaking in her home. They didn't see how hard she tried to hold on, planning date nights, writing notes, and asking Doug to slow down and see her again. Doug wasn't cruel or loud, which made it harder for Lisa to explain her pain. He was just absent, wrapped up in his mission while she slowly faded into the background. Lisa wondered if she was expecting too much, if wanting to be seen, loved, and valued by her husband was asking for something she didn't deserve. She looked back on the early days, when they were young, dreaming about their future, and promising to always choose each other. But now, in the quiet moments at home, Lisa realized the man who once chose her had stopped seeing her long ago, and the image of their perfect marriage was nothing like the reality she was living.
Yes, he's destroying me. And I said, no, Joni, something very bad has happened. And there's been an essay and all of this. Oh, no. And then she defended Pete. He's hurt Pete so much. The Pete that Rebecca and JW wrote a huge letter about. That Pete? The Pete that Rebecca and JW won't let into their home? That Pete? He's a good guy. She said that Susie was a pathological liar and that she had made these accusations against a very nice man, the chiropractor, who is deceased now, but has a record and attacked her. So I was in shock what Joni was saying to me. I implored her. I said, please reconcile with Jonathan for yourself. That would be the hope. I saw that side of her. I can only say it's nothing like the Joni on television. It's nothing like that sweet person. But I did see that person somewhat in the video where she was talking about Jonathan has been conducting a smear campaign. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I hadn't seen Jonathan conducting a smear campaign. I'd seen Jonathan.
Lisa Weiss had spent years trying to hold everything together. She wanted to believe that if she kept supporting Doug, kept praying, and kept hoping, things would get better. She believed in their marriage, in the vows they had made, and in the mission they were building together. She believed in Doug. Even when he stopped seeing her, even when he came home and barely looked at her, even when he was present in the house, but miles away in his mind. At first she told herself it was just a season. Doug was busy, working hard for God, helping other couples save their marriages. She reminded herself that his work mattered, that it was worth the sacrifice, and that God would honor her patience. She would plan date nights and write him small notes, hoping he would notice her again, hoping they could reconnect. But Doug was always tired, distracted, and already onto the next sermon or TV appearance, the next couple he needed to help, the next book he needed to write. Lisa felt the loneliness creeping in like a fog, slowly filling the corners of her heart. She would see Doug on stage, passionately teaching about love and faithfulness, telling husbands to cherish their wives, and she would feel a sharp pain in her chest. It was like he was preaching to everyone else but never to himself, never to her. She would watch him teach about the importance of family, while their family was quietly falling apart at home. There were nights Lisa would cry in the bathroom, turning on the sink so Doug wouldn't hear. She would wipe her tears, take a deep breath, and walk back out with a smile, pretending everything was fine. She didn't want to ruin his image, didn't want to ruin their ministry, and didn't want to admit that she was breaking inside. She kept telling herself to be strong, that it was her calling to support him, even if it meant sacrificing her own needs. But the silence grew louder. The moments of connection became fewer. The small gestures that once made her feel loved stopped coming. Doug would pray with people, share words of encouragement, and tell others how to pursue their spouses while Lisa felt unseen and unloved. She started to feel like she was living with a stranger, someone who looked like the man she married but no longer chose her, no longer saw her, no longer fought for her. Lisa tried to speak up. She tried to tell Doug how lonely she felt, how much she missed him, how much she needed him to see her. Doug would nod, say he understood, and promise to do better. But nothing changed. The next day, he would be gone again, off to another event, another meeting, another sermon, leaving Lisa behind with the echo of promises that were never kept. It wasn't a single moment that broke Lisa. It was the slow, constant drip of neglect, the small moments that added up over the years. It was the dinners eaten in silence, the phone calls that interrupted every conversation, the way Doug's eyes were always on his phone, his laptop or his notes instead of her. It was the way he could look at her without really seeing her, the way he could say "I love you" without showing it. Lisa started to feel like she was disappearing. She was losing herself in the shadow of Doug's mission, in the constant demands of supporting a man who had stopped choosing her long ago. She missed the woman she used to be, the woman who laughed freely, who felt seen, who felt loved. Now, she felt like a ghost in her own life, drifting through the days, doing what needed to be done, but feeling empty inside. The breaking point came quietly. It wasn't a loud fight or a dramatic moment. It was a quiet evening when Doug came home, barely acknowledged her, and went straight to work on his laptop. Lisa cooked dinner, set the table, and waited for him to join her. When he finally came, he sat down, eyes still on his phone, barely touching the food she had made. She tried to start a conversation, but he nodded distractedly, scrolling through his emails. In that moment, Lisa felt something inside her break. She realized that she couldn't keep living like this, that she couldn't keep pretending everything was okay, that she couldn't keep sacrificing herself for a man who didn't see her, didn't choose her, and didn't fight for her. She looked at Doug, sitting across the table, and felt a wave of grief wash over her. Grief for the love they had lost, grief for the woman she had lost, and grief for the dreams that would never be. That night, Lisa went to bed in tears, realizing that the marriage she was fighting for no longer existed. Doug was still there, but the connection was gone. The man who once held her close, who once whispered dreams in the dark, was now a stranger with a familiar face. Lisa knew she couldn't save a marriage alone. She couldn't be the only one fighting, the only one sacrificing, the only one trying. The next morning, Lisa woke up with a quiet resolve. She knew it was time to stop pretending, time to stop hiding her pain, and time to start finding herself again. She began to seek counseling, to journal her thoughts, and to rediscover who she was outside of being Doug's wife. It was painful, terrifying, and freeing all at once. She realized that her worth wasn't tied to Doug's approval, and her identity wasn't defined by being his silent supporter. Lisa's breaking point was the moment she decided to choose herself, to step out of the shadows and to reclaim her voice after years of being silent. It was the moment she understood that loving someone didn't mean losing yourself, and that faithfulness didn't mean accepting emotional neglect. It was the beginning of her journey to healing, to finding herself again, and to living a life where she was seen, valued, and loved. Not just by others, but by herself. When Lisa Weiss first heard that Doug had remarried, it was like her world stopped. The man she had stood beside for over 30 years, the man she had prayed for and believed in, was now standing next to another woman, smiling for photos and sharing their new beginning with the world. It wasn't just that he moved on. It was how fast it all happened. Just months after their divorce papers were signed, Doug was married again, and the woman he chose was Joni Lamb, a face Lisa had seen for years at conferences and Christian events, someone who was part of their world. To the public, it looked like a sweet story of two Christian leaders finding love after hardship. People congratulated them online. Church communities shared their God story, and social media was flooded with smiling photos and hashtags about new seasons and fresh starts. But for Lisa, each of those photos felt like a slap in the face. While Doug and Joni were celebrating, Lisa was still waking up each day to the silence of an empty house, trying to process the end of a marriage she had fought so hard to save. The hardest part wasn't just that Doug remarried quickly. It was that for years he had preached to others about fighting for their marriages, about the importance of faithfulness and patience, about honoring vows even when it was hard. Lisa had believed in those words. She had lived those words, sacrificing her own needs to support Doug's ministry while he traveled, spoke, and wrote books telling others how to love their spouses well. She had stayed home with the children, managed the house, and prayed for Doug, believing they were building something eternal together. Now, it felt like everything they had built was a lie. How could the man who spent his life telling others to fight for their marriage move on so quickly? How could he post smiling photos with Joni while Lisa was left to pick up the broken pieces of her heart and life? It felt like the ultimate betrayal, not just of Lisa as his wife, but of everything they had stood for together in ministry. There were whispers, of course, about how quickly it all happened. People who knew Lisa asked questions she couldn't answer. Had Doug and Joni been talking before the divorce was final? Was there something going on behind the scenes while Lisa was still praying for her marriage to be healed? Lisa didn't want to believe it, but the timeline felt too clean, too fast, too public to ignore. She found herself lying awake at night, replaying memories and wondering when Doug had started choosing Joni over the family he already had. What made it even more painful was the way their remarriage was celebrated publicly. Doug and Joni would go on television, sharing their story as if it were a testimony of God's goodness, while Lisa was left to grieve in silence. Friends who once prayed with Lisa and Doug were now posting blessings over the new couple, ignoring the pain Lisa was living through. This time around, Lisa was not in fear. She was not living in shame. Church leaders who once spoke about faithfulness and covenant were congratulating Doug without a second thought about the wife he left behind. Lisa felt erased, as if the decades she spent supporting Doug meant nothing now that he had a new life, a new partner, and a new public image to present. She would see posts praising Doug and Joni's marriage, calling it God's timing, while she was left to explain to their children why their father was starting a new family so soon after leaving theirs. The betrayal wasn't just private. It was public, loud, and celebrated by people who claimed to care about faith and family. Lisa would scroll through social media late at night, seeing photos of Doug and Joni smiling together at ministry events, and it felt like a punch to the gut each time. She remembered the years she had stood beside Doug at similar events, smiling for photos, believing they were serving God together. Now, it felt like she had been replaced, not just in Doug's life, but in the ministry they had built together. The children saw it too. They were old enough to understand that something was wrong, old enough to see the headlines and the smiling photos, old enough to feel the confusion and hurt that came with seeing their father with someone else so soon. Lisa tried to protect them, tried to shield them from the pain, but it was impossible to hide everything. Their world had been shattered, and there was no easy way to explain why the man who once preached about family was now starting a new one. Lisa tried to hold herself together, but the betrayal felt too heavy. It wasn't just losing Doug. It was losing the life she thought they were building forever. It was losing the dreams they had shared, the prayers they had prayed, and the faith she had placed in the idea that God would heal what was broken. It was seeing her life turned into a footnote while Doug stepped into a new chapter, celebrated by the same community that once celebrated their marriage. There were moments when Lisa felt like she was going crazy, questioning if she was expecting too much or if she was wrong to feel hurt. But deep down, she knew the truth. Love isn't supposed to feel like abandonment, and faithfulness isn't supposed to look like replacing your family in record time. She had spent so many years supporting Doug's mission, believing that their sacrifice mattered, that their commitment mattered. Now, it felt like she was the only one who believed that. The fast remarriage wasn't just an end for Lisa. It was a painful beginning of learning to let go of a man who chose his own path, even if it meant leaving her behind. It was the start of her journey to find herself again, to understand that her worth wasn't defined by Doug's choices or the image he presented to the world. It was a moment of deep grief, but also a moment of awakening, where Lisa realized she could no longer live in the shadow of someone else's story. The public betrayal hurt, but it also freed her. It pushed her to see that she deserved to be seen, loved, and valued for who she was, not for the role she played in someone else's life. It taught her that even when the world moves on without you, you can still choose to heal, to find peace, and to step into a future that is yours alone. After Doug's fast remarriage, Lisa Weiss found herself in a place she never imagined. The life she spent decades building was gone, replaced with silence and questions that had no answers. The woman who had once managed a home, supported a ministry, and stood by her husband's side through every high and low was now left to pick up the pieces of her life alone. For weeks she struggled to even get out of bed, feeling like every breath was heavy with grief and confusion. Lisa had always believed in fighting for her marriage, in praying for her family, and in trusting God to heal what was broken. She had spent countless nights praying for Doug to see her again, for the spark to return, and for the love they once shared to be restored. When the divorce was finalized and Doug moved on so quickly, it felt like everything she believed in had failed her. She felt betrayed, abandoned, and invisible. But in the quiet moments, Lisa began to realize that this wasn't the end of her story. At first, it was small things. She would get up and make herself a cup of tea, reminding herself that she was still here, that her life still mattered, even if it looked different now. She started journaling, pouring out the hurt, the anger, and the confusion onto the pages, allowing herself to process the pain she had held in for so long. Each word she wrote was a step toward reclaiming her voice, a voice that had been silenced by years of putting everyone else first. Lisa also began to spend more time in prayer, but this time her prayers changed. She stopped praying for Doug to come back or for the past to be restored. Instead, she prayed for strength, for healing, and for the courage to step into the future God had for her, even if it was different from the future she had planned. She asked God to show her who she was without Doug, to help her find herself again after years of feeling unseen. One of the hardest parts of healing for Lisa was letting go of the guilt she carried. She had spent years blaming herself for the breakdown of their marriage, questioning if she was too demanding, if she should have been more understanding, or if she was the reason Doug drifted away. It took time, but Lisa began to understand that she could not carry the responsibility for choices that were not hers to make. She had been faithful, she had tried, and she had loved deeply. That was enough. As she began to find herself again, Lisa started to reconnect with things that once brought her joy. She spent time with her children, not as the wife holding a family together for an absent husband, but as a mother who was present and intentional. She started to take walks, noticing the beauty of the world around her that she had been too busy or too sad to see before. The warmth of the sun, the sound of birds, and the simple act of moving her body became reminders that life was still good, even in the midst of pain. Lisa also found comfort in her friendships, some of which had faded during the years she spent trying to keep her marriage together. Friends who had once felt distant now became sources of strength, reminding her that she was not alone. They listened as she shared her pain, sat with her during the moments she couldn't find words, and celebrated the small victories with her as she began to heal. Healing wasn't a quick process. There were days when Lisa felt strong, ready to embrace her new life, and days when the weight of what she lost would knock her back down. Birthdays, anniversaries, and holidays were especially hard, bringing memories of what once was and reminding her of the dreams that would never come true. But even on the hard days, Lisa chose to keep moving forward, to allow herself to grieve while also allowing herself to grow. One of the most powerful steps in Lisa's healing journey was learning to forgive. At first, the idea of forgiving Doug felt impossible. The hurt was too deep, the betrayal too fresh, and the pain too real. But Lisa began to understand that forgiveness wasn't about letting Doug off the hook, it was about freeing herself from the bitterness that was weighing her down. She didn't excuse his choices or pretend that what happened was okay, but she chose to release the anger so it would no longer control her. As Lisa forgave, she found herself feeling lighter. She no longer wanted to live a life defined by what Doug had done or who he chose to become. She wanted her life to be defined by her faith, her strength, and the love she still had to give. She started to dream again, allowing herself to imagine a future where she was happy, fulfilled, and living in peace. Lisa also began to share her story with others, realizing that her journey could help women who felt unseen and unheard in their own lives. She spoke to women's groups, wrote online, and had quiet conversations with those who were struggling in silence, just as she once had. Her story was not one of bitterness, but of hope. She reminded others that they were not alone, that their pain did not define them, and that healing was possible, even after the deepest betrayal. Through this journey, Lisa learned that healing was not about forgetting the past, but about honoring it while choosing to move forward. She learned that it was okay to grieve, to feel the pain, and to acknowledge the loss, while still believing that better days were ahead. She discovered that her worth was not tied to being a wife, to supporting a ministry, or to the image others had of her. Her worth came from who she was, a woman created and loved by God, with a purpose that went beyond what she had lost. Lisa's journey to healing was not about a dramatic comeback or a sudden moment of victory. It was about quiet strength, daily choices, and the gentle process of rebuilding a life from the ashes of what had been lost. It was about learning to love herself again, to find peace in the present, and to trust that the future could still be good. Now, when Lisa looks in the mirror, she sees a woman who has walked through the fire and come out stronger. She sees a woman who has learned to stand on her own, who has found her voice, and who is no longer living in the shadows of someone else's story. She sees hope, not because everything is perfect, but because she has chosen to keep going, to keep believing, and to keep loving, even after everything that tried to break her. Lisa's journey to healing is a reminder to everyone that it is possible to rise again, even when it feels like everything has fallen apart. It is a story of courage, faith, and the quiet power of choosing to heal no matter how long it takes.